I was standing in my driveway in Columbus, Ohio, staring at the official-looking letter in my hands when I realized that the Homeowners Association had finally lost their minds completely. The notice, printed on expensive cream-colored paper with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA letterhead, informed me that I had 72 hours to fix my severely damaged and negligent gutter system, or face immediate eviction proceedings and daily fines starting at $200. The date was January 15th, and we were in the middle of one of the worst cold snaps Ohio had seen in 20 years. My name is Ethan Quincy, and I had lived in this modest 3-bedroom ranch house for exactly 18 months. I bought it after my divorce, thinking a quiet suburban neighborhood would be the perfect place to rebuild my life and have somewhere nice for my kids to visit on weekends. The house itself was only 7 years old, built in 2018 as part of the Meadowbrook development. Everything about it had been pristine when I moved in, including the gutters that were now apparently grounds for my eviction. I walked to the side of my house and looked up at the gutters. They were frozen solid, packed with ice that had formed during the recent temperature swings. We had gotten snow, then a brief thaw, then temperatures had plummeted to 5 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. The ice in my gutters was so thick it was pulling them slightly away from the roofline, creating small gaps. I could see icicles hanging down like crystalline daggers, some of them nearly 3 feet long. The thing was, I had cleaned those gutters in October, right before the first freeze. I did it myself, spending an entire Saturday afternoon up on my ladder, scooping out leaves and debris, making sure the downspouts were clear. I had been diligent about home maintenance, having learned the hard way during my marriage what happens when you let things slide. My ex-wife had constantly complained about my lack of attention to household matters, and I had promised myself I would do better in my own place. My phone rang as I stood there in the cold. It was my neighbor, Frank Miller, who lived 3 houses down. "You get one of those crazy letters too?" Frank asked without preamble. "Yeah, just now. About the gutters. Same here. Mine are frozen solid. I tried to chip away at the ice yesterday and nearly fell off my ladder. My wife made me stop before I killed myself." "This is insane, Ethan. We are in the middle of winter." "What do they expect us to do?" I exhaled, watching my breath form clouds in the frigid air. "I have no idea. The letter says 72 hours or eviction. Can they even do that?" "I have been in this neighborhood since these houses were built," Frank said. He was 63, retired from the Postal Service, and had been one of the first people to welcome me when I moved in. "The HOA has always been strict, but this is ridiculous. That woman, Deborah Cunningham, she became HOA president last year and has been on a power trip ever since." "Deborah." Of course. I had met her exactly once, at a mandatory HOA meeting I had attended shortly after moving in. She was a 47-year-old woman with an asymmetrical blonde bob and the kind of tight smile that never reached her eyes. She had spent the entire meeting talking about property values and community standards, using words like compliance and enforcement with disturbing frequency. She lived in one of the larger homes at the entrance to the development, a 2-story colonial that she constantly referred to as setting the standard for the neighborhood. "What are we supposed to do?" I asked Frank. "I am calling an attorney tomorrow. This is harassment." "You cannot evict someone for frozen gutters in the middle of winter. It is not even technically negligence. It is weather." After hanging up with Frank, I went inside and actually read the entire letter more carefully. The language was deliberately vague but threatening. It cited Section 7.3 of the HOA Covenant, which dealt with exterior home maintenance. It claimed that my failure to maintain my gutters constituted a violation that endangered neighboring properties through potential water damage and created an unsightly appearance that diminished property values. The letter was signed by Deborah Cunningham in her capacity as HOA president and countersigned by two board members, Patricia Henderson and Mark Vance. I barely knew either of them. Patricia was another middle-aged woman who seemed to spend her days walking her tiny dog and photographing homes that did not meet her standards. Mark was a younger guy, maybe 35, who worked in finance and seemed to just go along with whatever Deborah wanted. I spent that evening researching Ohio HOA laws and what rights homeowners actually had. The information I found was concerning. HOAs in Ohio did have significant power, but they still had to follow proper procedures. They could not just evict someone without going through the courts. However, they could place liens on properties for unpaid fines, and those liens could eventually lead to foreclosure if left unresolved. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I was an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, and January was always our slow period before tax season really ramped up. I needed to deal with this HOA situation before it spiraled out of control. I started by calling 3 different roofing and gutter companies. The first 2 could not even come out for an estimate for at least 2 weeks because they were so backed up with emergency repairs from the cold snap. Apparently, frozen gutters were destroying roof lines all over Columbus. The third company, Riverside Roofing and Gutters, said they could send someone out that afternoon. The technician who showed up was a guy in his 50s named Tom Berkshire. He had the weathered face of someone who had spent his entire adult life working outdoors. He pulled up in a white van with the company logo on the side and got out with a ladder and a clipboard. "You are the third call I have gotten from this neighborhood today," Tom said as he shook my hand. "All the same issue, all the same threatening letter from your HOA. Really? Who else called?" "Guy named Frank Miller. Woman named Sandra Chen. Both got the same letter you did." Tom spent 45 minutes examining my gutters from every angle. He set up his ladder at different points around the house, taking photographs with a professional camera. He also took measurements and made notes on his clipboard. Finally, he climbed down and gestured for me to follow him to his van. "Okay, here is the situation," Tom said, pulling out a tablet and showing me photos. "Your gutters are frozen because of a design flaw that exists in every single house in this development. See this angle here?" He zoomed in on a photo showing where the gutter met the roof line. The builder, whoever they were, installed these gutters with insufficient pitch. They look level to the eye, but they need to have at least a 1/4-inch slope per 10 feet of run to drain properly. So this is not my fault, not even a little bit. This is a construction defect. When you get freeze-thaw cycles like we have had this month, any water that does not fully drain is going to freeze and create ice dams. Once that ice builds up, it prevents new water from draining, and you get exactly what you have got here. He gestured at the icicles hanging from my roofline. "What is the fix, ideally? Remove all the gutters and reinstall them with proper pitch. For a house this size, you are looking at maybe $3,000. But here is the thing. Every house in Meadowbrook Estates has the same problem because they were all built by the same company with the same faulty installation. I have been out here probably 50 times over the past 5 years dealing with this exact issue." I felt a weight lift off my chest. This was not my negligence. This was a construction defect that predated my ownership. "Can you document all of this?" I asked. "I need proof to show the HOA." "Already done. I will email you a full report with photos, measurements, and my professional assessment." I will also include information about every other house in this neighborhood that has had the same problem. I keep detailed records of all my jobs." Tom was as good as his word. By that evening, I had a 15-page report in my email, complete with technical diagrams and photographs not just of my house, but of at least 20 other homes in Meadowbrook Estates. The report clearly stated that the gutter issue was a systematic construction defect affecting the entire development. I forwarded the report to Frank and asked if he wanted to coordinate our response to the HOA. He agreed immediately and suggested we also reach out to Sandra Chen and anyone else who had received the threatening letters. By the next day, we had identified 8 homeowners who had received identical eviction threats. We decided to attend the next HOA board meeting as a group, which was scheduled for the following Tuesday, January 21st. That gave us a few days to prepare. I also decided to consult with an attorney. I found a lawyer named Jennifer Torres who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in a modern building in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus. She was a sharp woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun. "This is fairly straightforward," Jennifer said after reviewing my documents. "The HOA is threatening you with eviction for what amounts to a latent construction defect. They have no legal grounds. Moreover, if they are selectively enforcing this rule against only certain homeowners while ignoring others who have the same issue, that is discriminatory and violates their own bylaws. What should I do? Go to their meeting with your evidence. Present it calmly and professionally. Request that they withdraw the violations and the fines. If they refuse, I will send them a letter on your behalf. If they continue to pursue this, we can file a lawsuit for harassment and potentially recover attorney fees." The cost of the consultation was $300, but it was worth it for the peace of mind. I felt armed with information and ready to confront Deborah and her board. Tuesday evening arrived cold and clear. The HOA meeting was held in the community center at the entrance to Meadowbrook Estates, a bland brick building that also housed a small gym and a meeting room. Frank, Sandra, and I arrived together, along with 5 other homeowners who had received violations. We had coordinated our approach. Frank, being the oldest and longest tenured resident, would speak first. I would present the technical evidence from Tom's report. Sandra, who was an engineer, would explain the construction defect in simple terms. The meeting room was arranged with a long table at the front where the board sat. Deborah Cunningham sat in the center, flanked by Patricia Henderson and Mark Vance. There were about 20 other residents in the audience, most of whom had come to watch what they had heard would be a confrontation. Deborah called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. She had an agenda printed out and started by reading through minutes from the previous meeting. Everything was done with meticulous formality, which I suspected was intentional. She wanted to establish her authority before we even got a chance to speak. Finally, after 20 minutes of procedural matters, Deborah opened the floor for homeowner concerns. Frank stood up immediately. "I am here about the gutter violations that were sent to multiple homeowners last week. I think this board owes us an explanation for these threats." Deborah's expression did not change. "Those were not threats, Mr. Miller. Those were notices of violation. The board has a responsibility to maintain property values and aesthetic standards in this community. Multiple homes have been observed with severely damaged gutters, and we are simply enforcing our covenants." In the middle of January, Frank's voice was rising. "During record cold temperatures, we all cleaned our gutters before winter. The issue is ice formation due to the cold weather, which is beyond our control." Patricia Henderson leaned forward. She was a thin woman with gray, streaked hair and narrow glasses. "The covenants do not make exceptions for weather, Mr. Miller. Homeowners are responsible for maintaining their properties year-round." I stood up, holding a folder with printed copies of Tom's report. "I have evidence that contradicts your assessment. May I present it?" Deborah looked annoyed but gestured for me to approach. I walked to the front and handed copies of the report to each board member. "This is a professional assessment from a licensed roofing contractor," I said, addressing both the board and the audience. "It clearly shows that the gutter issue affects multiple homes in this neighborhood and is caused by a construction defect, specifically improper pitch during installation. This is not a maintenance issue. This is a defect that existed before any of us bought our homes." I watched Deborah's face as she flipped through the report. Her jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "This report was prepared by someone you hired," Deborah said. "Of course it will support your position. That does not change the fact that your gutters are currently in violation of our standards." Sandra stood up. "I am a civil engineer. I have reviewed this report, and it is technically sound. The construction defect is real and affects most if not all homes in this development. You cannot fine people for a defect that was present at construction." Mark Vance spoke for the first time. "Even if there is a construction defect, that does not absolve current homeowners of their responsibility to fix it. The violation stands. You have all been given sufficient time to address the issue." Sufficient time? I could not keep the frustration out of my voice. "You gave us 72 hours in the middle of winter to fix a problem that requires professional re-roofing work that cannot even be safely done in freezing temperatures. This is unreasonable, and you know it." The meeting devolved from there. Other homeowners in the audience started speaking up, some supporting us, others arguing that rules were rules. Deborah tried to maintain control, but the room had become chaotic. Finally, she gavelled the meeting back to order. "The board will take your information under advisement," Deborah said coldly. "However, the violations stand. You have until January 18th, which has now passed. Effective immediately, you are being assessed daily fines of $200 until the violations are corrected." "This meeting is adjourned." She stood up and walked out, followed by Patricia and Mark. The audience erupted in arguments. Frank looked at me and shook his head. "That went about as well as I expected," he said. "They did not even consider the evidence," Sandra said. She looked genuinely shocked. "They did not care about the technical analysis at all." I called Jennifer Torres the next morning and relayed what had happened at the meeting. She listened carefully, asking clarifying questions. "They are exposing themselves to significant liability," Jennifer said. "I am going to draft a cease and desist letter. I will also include a demand that they withdraw the violations and provide written confirmation that no fines will be assessed. If they do not comply within 10 days, we will file suit." "How much is this going to cost me?" "I can do the letter for $500. If we have to file suit, my retainer is $5,000, but HOA cases often result in attorney fee awards if we prevail, which means you could recover your costs." I agreed to proceed. $500 was a lot of money, but the alternative was paying $200 per day in fines indefinitely. The math was simple. Jennifer's letter was delivered to the HOA board on January 24th via certified mail. It was 3 pages of legal language that basically said the HOA was violating Ohio law, breaching its own covenants through selective enforcement, and harassing homeowners. It demanded immediate withdrawal of all violations and fines. The HOA's response came 4 days later. It was a 2-paragraph letter from an attorney named Robert Chambers stating that the board stood by its actions and would proceed with all enforcement measures as outlined in the covenants. "They are calling our bluff," Jennifer said, when I showed her the response. "They think you all will back down rather than fight. We need to file suit." Frank, Sandra, and I decided to split the cost of the lawsuit. 2 other homeowners joined us as plaintiffs. Between the 5 of us, the financial burden was manageable, though still painful. Jennifer filed the lawsuit in Franklin County Court on February 3rd. The complaint alleged harassment, breach of covenant obligations, selective enforcement, and sought both injunctive relief and damages. It also asked for attorney fees. The local media got wind of the case about a week later. A reporter from the Columbus Dispatch called me and asked if I would be willing to be interviewed. I agreed, figuring that public pressure might help our cause. The article ran on February 14th with the headline "Meadowbrook HOA Faces Lawsuit Over Winter Gutter Violations." It was a fair piece that laid out both sides of the dispute. The reporter had interviewed Deborah, who gave a statement about the importance of maintaining community standards. But the article also included quotes from Tom Berkshire, the roofing contractor, who explained the construction defect issue in simple terms that any raider could understand. The article included photographs of houses throughout Meadowbrook Estates, showing that dozens of homes had the same frozen gutter problem. Tom had provided those photos from his archives, and they were damning. You could see that this was not an isolated issue affecting a few negligent homeowners. This was a neighborhood-wide problem that had existed for years. Public reaction to the article was swift and largely on our side. The comments section on the Dispatch website was filled with people criticizing the HOA for their overreach. Several news stations picked up the story, and by the end of the week, a local TV reporter had shown up to film my house and interview me on camera. The attention seemed to make Deborah more defensive rather than conciliatory. She gave another interview to a different TV station where she doubled down, saying that homeowners knew what they were signing up for when they bought in a covenant-controlled community, and that enforcing standards was her duty as president. Meanwhile, I was still receiving bills from the HOA for daily fines. By the end of February, they claimed I owed $12,000. I refused to pay, on advice from Jennifer, but the debt was accumulating on paper. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing for March 10th. Jennifer explained that this would be an opportunity to seek a temporary injunction preventing the HOA from assessing further fines while the case proceeded. I took the day off work and met Jennifer at the Franklin County Courthouse downtown. It was an imposing stone building with high ceilings and marble floors. We were directed to a courtroom on the 3rd floor where Judge Michael Patterson would hear arguments. Deborah was there with her attorney, Robert Chambers. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit. Deborah was dressed in a navy blue business suit and sat with her hands folded on the table, looking confident. Judge Patterson was a black man in his early 50s with graying temples and reading glasses perched on his nose. He called the case and asked for opening statements. Jennifer stood and outlined our position clearly and concisely. She presented the roofing report, photographs showing the widespread nature of the problem, and testimony from Tom Berkshire, who we had brought as a witness. Tom explained the construction defect issue and testified that he had documented this same problem in over 40 homes in Meadowbrook Estates over the past 5 years. Robert Chambers argued that the HOA had a legal right and obligation to enforce its covenants, and that whether the problem was caused by a construction defect or poor maintenance was irrelevant. The current homeowners were responsible for fixing it. Judge Patterson asked several pointed questions. "Mr. Chambers, Are you arguing that the HOA can require homeowners to fix construction defects that existed before they purchased their properties, in the middle of winter, under threat of eviction and substantial daily fines? Your Honor, the covenants place responsibility for home maintenance on the homeowners. The board is simply enforcing those covenants uniformly. Uniformly. The judge looked at the photographs Jennifer had submitted. These photos show dozens of homes with the same issue. Were all of these homeowners given violations? There was a pause. Deborah whispered something to Robert Chambers. The board has focused its initial enforcement on the most severe cases, Chambers said. So not uniform enforcement then, the judge said. He made a note on his legal pad. The hearing lasted about 90 minutes. At the end, Judge Patterson announced his decision from the bench. I am granting a temporary injunction. The HOA is prohibited from assessing any further fines related to gutter violations until this matter is resolved at trial. The existing fines are stayed pending the outcome of the case. The evidence presented suggests that the plaintiffs have a strong likelihood of success on the merits. This appears to be a construction defect issue rather than a maintenance issue, and the timing and severity of the HOA's enforcement actions are questionable at best. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We had won the first battle. Deborah's face was tight with anger as she left the courtroom. Over the next few weeks, more homeowners came forward with stories of HOA harassment. It turned out that Deborah had been targeting people for various violations over the past year, always with the same threatening tone and aggressive timelines. A woman named Maria Rodriguez had been fined for having a garden gnome in her front yard. A man named Keith Palmer had received a violation for parking his work van in his driveway overnight. The pattern was clear. Deborah was using the HOA presidency as a way to bully and control her neighbors. Jennifer suggested that we amend our lawsuit to include these other instances as evidence of a pattern of harassment. 3 more homeowners joined as plaintiffs, bringing our total to 8. The amended complaint was filed in early April. The case was scheduled for a full trial in June, but Robert Chambers contacted Jennifer in early May to discuss a possible settlement. The negotiations took place over several phone calls and email exchanges. The HOA's insurance company was involved now, and they were apparently not happy with the exposure. The insurance company's attorney made it clear that they wanted this case to go away. The final settlement was reached on May 22nd. The terms were favorable to us. All fines and violations related to gutter issues would be withdrawn and expunged from homeowner records. The HOA would pay all of our attorney fees, which totaled $18,000. The HOA would also agree to conduct a neighborhood-wide assessment of the gutter situation, and would not issue any further violations related to gutters until after a qualified engineering firm had studied the problem and made recommendations. Additionally, and this was the part that gave me the most satisfaction, Deborah Cunningham and Patricia Henderson agreed to resign from the HOA board immediately. The settlement did not explicitly state that they were being forced out, but it was clear that this was a condition of the insurance company agreeing to cover the settlement costs. The settlement was finalized in early June. Jennifer called me with the news on a Friday afternoon. "It is over," she said. "You won. The settlement agreement has been signed by all parties and the court will dismiss the case with prejudice." I felt an enormous sense of relief. The stress of the past 5 months had been overwhelming. I had been worried about losing my home, about the financial burden of the fines and legal fees, about the constant conflict with the HOA. Now it was done. Frank called me that evening. "Did you hear? Deborah resigned. She sent an email to the whole neighborhood this afternoon. She said she was stepping down for personal reasons, but we all know the truth. Patricia too, I said. They both resigned as part of the settlement. Good riddance. That woman made everyone's life miserable. Maybe now we can have a normal HOA that is actually focused on maintaining the neighborhood instead of harassing residents. The annual HOA election was held in July. A slate of new board members was elected, including Frank, who agreed to serve as treasurer. The new president was a reasonable woman named Carol Simpson, who had lived in the neighborhood for 12 years and had been vocal in her opposition to Deborah's aggressive tactics. One of the first actions of the new board was to hire an engineering firm to assess the gutter situation throughout Meadowbrook Estates. The firm's report, delivered in August, confirmed everything Tom Berkshire had said. The gutters throughout the entire development had been installed with insufficient pitch, creating drainage problems that were particularly severe during freeze-thaw cycles. The report recommended that all homeowners be given the option to have their gutters professionally reinstalled with proper pitch, and suggested that the HOA should negotiate a group rate with a roofing company to make it affordable. The board accepted the recommendations and negotiated a deal with Riverside Roofing, Tom's company. Homeowners could opt in to have their gutters fixed for $2,000 per house, with the work to be done in phases over the next year. I signed up immediately. Tom's crew came to my house in September. They removed all the old gutters, made sure the fascia boards were in good condition, and installed new gutters with the proper 1/4 inch per 10 feet slope. The work took a day and a half, and when it was done, Tom walked me around the house showing me how water would now drain properly. "You should not have any more ice dam problems," Tom said. "I mean, you will still get some icicles in extreme cold, that is just physics. But nothing like what you had last winter." "Thanks for everything," I said, shaking his hand. "Your report really saved us. If we had not had that documentation, I do not know if we could have fought the HOA. Happy to help. I have been watching HOAs bully homeowners for years." It felt good to finally have the evidence make a difference. By October, my life had returned to normal. My kids came to visit every other weekend, and we would play in the backyard or walk around the neighborhood. The fall colors were beautiful, the trees lining the streets turning brilliant shades of red and gold. I ran into Deborah exactly once after her resignation. It was at the grocery store in late October. We ended up in the same checkout line. I saw her see me, and for a moment I thought she might leave and find another line, but she stayed standing stiffly with her cart. "Hello, Deborah," I said. I figured I could be civil. She looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Anger, embarrassment. "Hello." There was an awkward silence. Finally, she spoke again. "I was trying to maintain property values. That was all. I was not trying to hurt anyone." "You were fining people $200 a day for frozen gutters," I said, "for something that was not even their fault. How did you think people would react?" "I thought people would appreciate having a strong HOA that kept the neighborhood nice. I thought that is what people wanted. People want to be treated fairly," I said. "They want an HOA that is reasonable and that does not threaten them over things they cannot control." She did not respond. The line moved forward and it was her turn to check out. She unloaded her groceries in silence, paid, and left without saying goodbye. I did not feel particularly good about the exchange. There was no satisfaction in watching someone realize they had been wrong. I just felt tired and ready to move on. Winter came again, the first snow falling in mid-November. I watched my gutters carefully during the first freeze-thaw cycle of the season. Water drained properly. A few small icicles formed, but nothing like the ice dams from the previous year. The new gutters were doing their job. Frank retired as HOA treasurer in January, having served his one-year term. He told me he was happy to pass the responsibility to someone else. We had become good friends through the whole ordeal, and we still got together regularly to watch football games and complain about the weather. Sandra Chen ended up running for a board position and won. She brought an engineer's attention to detail to the role and helped implement several other improvements in the neighborhood, including repaving some of the older streets and updating the community center's HVAC system. Life in Meadowbrook Estates was not perfect, but it was significantly better than it had been under Deborah's reign. The HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and enforcing rules in a reasonable and fair manner. I stayed in my house, content with my quiet life. My kids grew older. My son started middle school. My daughter discovered a passion for soccer. We spent weekends at games and practices, building new memories. Sometimes, on cold winter nights, I would look out at my gutters and remember that terrible January when Deborah had threatened to take my home away over ice formation. It seemed almost absurd in retrospect. But it had been very real at the time, and it had taught me an important lesson about standing up to bullies, even when they came wrapped in the authority of an HOA board. The story could have ended very differently. If Frank had not organized the other homeowners, if we had not found Tom and his detailed records, if we had not been willing to hire an attorney and fight back, Deborah might have succeeded in forcing us out or extracting thousands of dollars in unjust fines. The system had worked in the end, but it had required effort and expense and stress. I learned that HOAs could be forces for good or for tyranny, depending on who was running them. The covenants and rules were just words on paper. What mattered was how they were interpreted and enforced. A reasonable board could create a pleasant community. An unreasonable board could make life hell. The following summer, the neighborhood held a community picnic at the park near the entrance. It was a beautiful June day, sunny and warm but not too hot. There were grills set up with hamburgers and hot dogs, tables laden with side dishes and desserts that residents had brought to share. Kids ran around playing tag and flying kites. Adults stood in clusters, talking and laughing. Carol Simpson, the HOA president, gave a short speech thanking everyone for making Meadowbrook Estates such a great place to live. She specifically mentioned how the community had come together during the gutter controversy and used it as an opportunity to fix a long-standing problem. "That is what neighbors do," Carol said. "We work together to solve problems instead of fighting each other. That is the kind of community I am proud to be part of." There was applause, and then the afternoon continued with people eating and socializing. I stood with Frank and Sandra, watching my kids play with other children from the neighborhood. "Hard to believe it has been a year and a half since all that drama," Frank said, sipping a beer. "Best thing that ever happened to this neighborhood," Sandra said. "It got rid of Deborah and Patricia and showed everyone what an HOA should not be." I nodded, but I was not sure I agreed that it had been the best thing. It had been necessary, but it had also been exhausting and stressful. I would have preferred to never have gone through it at all. But I understood what Sandra meant. The community was stronger now. People were more engaged, more willing to speak up when something did not seem right. The new board was transparent and held regular meetings where homeowners actually felt comfortable voicing concerns. As the picnic wound down and the sun began to set, I helped clean up, folding tables and bagging trash. My kids were tired and happy, sunburned and full of hot dogs and cookies. We walked home together through the quiet streets of Meadowbrook Estates, past houses with their properly functioning gutters and well-maintained yards. I thought about the path that had led me here, the divorce, the search for a new home, the unexpected battle with the HOA. Life rarely went according to plan. You had to adapt and fight when necessary and appreciate the good moments when they came. My house looked welcoming as we approached it, the front porch light already on. I had planted new flowers in the spring, and they were blooming now in vibrant colors. The lawn was neatly mowed. Everything was in order. We went inside, and I made sure the kids brushed their teeth before bed. They were staying the whole week this time, a change in the custody arrangement that my ex-wife and I had negotiated. Things were better between us now, too, more civil and focused on what was best for the children. After the kids were asleep, I sat on my back deck with a beer, listening to the sounds of the summer night. Crickets chirped in the darkness. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The air was warm and smelled of cut grass. I thought about Tom's report, the document that had changed everything. 15 pages of technical analysis and photographs that proved what we had all suspected. The problem was not our fault. It was validation that we had not been crazy or lazy or negligent. It was proof that sometimes the authorities are wrong, and fighting back is the right choice. The legal system had worked slowly but surely. Judge Patterson had seen through the HOA's arguments and recognized the injustice. Jennifer Torres had been a skilled advocate who knew the law and how to present our case effectively. The insurance company had ultimately forced a reasonable resolution because they understood the risk of going to trial, but it had also required ordinary people to stand up. Frank organizing the homeowners, Sandra explaining the engineering. Me being willing to spend money I could not really afford on attorneys and reports. 8 families joining together to say no to bullying and overreach. I wondered what Deborah was doing now. I had heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband were thinking about moving. I did not wish her ill, but I was not sorry to see her go. Some people should not be in positions of authority over their neighbors. Some people see rules as weapons rather than guidelines for community living. The next winter was mild, and the gutters performed perfectly. I did not have a single ice dam. The water drained away as it was supposed to, and the icicles that formed were small and decorative rather than massive and destructive. Other homeowners who had opted for the gutter replacement reported the same results. The problem that had seemed so intractable was fixed, simply because the gutters had been installed correctly this time. Years passed. My kids grew into teenagers. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. Work was steady and satisfying. The neighborhood continued to be a good place to live. The HOA remained reasonable under Carol's leadership, and then under subsequent presidents who maintained the same balanced approach. I eventually became friends with Mark Vance, the board member who had sided with Deborah during the original controversy. He reached out to me a few years later to apologize. I was new to the board and did not really understand what was happening, Mark said over coffee at a local shop. Deborah was very convincing about maintaining standards and property values. It took me a while to realize she was just on a power trip. You could have voted against her, I said. I know, I should have. I was a coward, frankly. I did not want the conflict. But watching what happened to you and Frank and the others, seeing how she was willing to destroy people over frozen gutters, that woke me up. I resigned from the board 6 months after the settlement. I could not be part of that anymore. I appreciated the apology. It took courage to admit you had been wrong, especially years after the fact. Mark and I did not become close friends, but we were cordial after that, and I respected that he had been willing to own his mistakes. The frozen gutter incident became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Estates. New homeowners would hear the story and ask questions about what had happened. It served as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of choosing good board members. The story also made its way to other neighborhoods. I was contacted by homeowners from different HOAs around Columbus who were facing their own disputes. I shared Jennifer Torres's contact information and told them what we had learned. Document everything, get expert opinions, and do not be afraid to fight back when the HOA is wrong. Some of those homeowners won their battles. Others settled. A few lost, either because their cases were not as strong or because they did not have the resources to sustain a legal fight. The system was not perfect, but it was better than having no recourse at all. I eventually paid off my mortgage early and considered moving to a neighborhood without an HOA. But by then, Meadowbrook Estates felt like home. I knew my neighbors. My kids had grown up here. The bad memories of the gutter controversy had faded, replaced by years of normal, peaceful living. I did make one significant change, though. I ran for the HOA board myself and won a seat. I served a 3-year term as secretary, helping to manage the association's records and communications. It was not glamorous work, but it was important. I wanted to make sure that the HOA stayed on track, that it served homeowners rather than ruling over them. During my time on the board, we updated the covenants to include more specific language about reasonable enforcement timelines and weather-related exceptions. We also implemented a formal appeals process so that homeowners who received violations could challenge them before fines were assessed. These might seem like small changes, but they mattered. They created checks and balances that had not existed before. They prevented another Deborah from using the HOA presidency as a personal fiefdom. Looking back on the whole experience from the perspective of many years, I see it as a defining moment in my life. Not because it was pleasant or because I enjoyed the conflict, but because it taught me that you can fight authority when authority is wrong. You can win, even when the other side has institutional power and expensive lawyers. The frozen gutters that almost cost me my home became a symbol of something larger. The importance of standing up to bullies, the value of community solidarity, and the power of documentation and facts. Tom's report was more than just a technical analysis of improper gutter pitch. It was proof that reality mattered, that truth could prevail over intimidation. On cold winter nights, even now, I sometimes go outside and look at my gutters. The ice that forms is minimal, and the water drains away properly when temperatures rise. The system works the way it is supposed to work. And I remember that terrible January day when I stood in my driveway reading Deborah's threatening letter. I remember the fear and anger I felt. And I remember the decision I made not to back down, not to accept an unjust accusation, not to let the HOA take my home over a construction defect that was not my fault. That decision changed everything. It protected my home. It helped other homeowners. It reformed the HOA. And it taught me something essential about myself. I was stronger than I thought, and I would not be pushed around by petty tyrants hiding behind covenants and bylaws. The gutters are just gutters now, functional parts of my house that do their job without drama or controversy. But they will always remind me of the time I had to fight for my home and won. They are a monument to the importance of standing up for yourself, of demanding fairness, and of refusing to accept injustice just because someone in authority declares it to be so. Meadowbrook Estates remains a good neighborhood, a place where families can live and grow and build memories. The HOA functions as it should, maintaining property without harassing homeowners. The streets are clean, the common areas are well kept, and people generally get along. It is an ordinary place, Really, no different from thousands of other suburban developments across America. Except that everyone who lives here knows the story of the frozen gutters and the HOA president who went too far. They know what can happen when power goes unchecked, and they know that ordinary people working together can push back against abuse. That knowledge makes all the difference. It creates a culture where people are not afraid to question authority, where the board knows it serves at the pleasure of the homeowners, where rules are enforced fairly and reasonably. My kids are adults now with lives of their own. I am approaching retirement age and thinking about what comes next. I might eventually sell the house and move somewhere warmer, somewhere without brutal Ohio winters and frozen gutters. But for now, I am content. I have a home that is truly mine, paid for with my labor and protected by my willingness to fight for it. I have neighbors who became friends through shared struggle. I have memories both good and bad that have shaped who I am. The frozen gutters that nearly destroyed my life instead became the catalyst for positive change. The crisis that seemed insurmountable was overcome through persistence and community. The authority that seemed absolute was proven to have limits. These are the lessons I carry with me. These are the truths I learned standing in my driveway on that cold January day, fighting for my home against an HOA that thought it could bully me into submission. The gutters are fixed. The HOA is reformed. The neighborhood is at peace. And I am still here in my house, living my life, grateful for the outcome but mindful of how easily it could have gone differently. Sometimes justice prevails. Sometimes the little guy wins. Sometimes frozen gutters lead to something more important than proper water drainage. They lead to recognition that we all deserve to be treated fairly, that rules should be reasonable, and that fighting back against injustice is not just a right but a responsibility. This is my story. This is what happened when an HOA tried to evict me over frozen gutters, and a roofer proved that every house had the same issue. It is a story about home, community, justice, and the power of ordinary people to resist extraordinary overreach. And every time it snows, every time the temperature drops below freezing, I look at my gutters and smile, remembering the battle I fought and won, grateful for the home that is mine and the peace that came after the storm.